The morning light of 3 suns painted the crystal towers of the Galactic Educational Institute in shades of gold and silver. Floating platforms drifted between the spires like gentle clouds, carrying students from dozens of different worlds to their classes. The academy stood as the crown jewel of learning in the galaxy, where young minds from across the stars came to study the great mysteries of space and the many species that filled it. Zektar walked across the main platform with the confident stride that only came from being born into the warrior race of Altarians. His 4 powerful arms moved in perfect rhythm as he navigated through crowds of alien students. His people had conquered 17 star systems through pure strength and military skill, at 7 feet tall with skin like polished bronze and eyes that glowed amber in the morning light. He commanded respect wherever he went. Other students moved aside as he passed, recognizing the natural authority that all Altarians carried. Near the entrance to the history building, Kulima waited with the patient stillness that marked her species. The cerebral collective had long, ego-abandoned physical bodies like those of other races, choosing instead to exist as pure thought housed in crystalline forms. Her body sparkled like a living diamond, each facet catching and bending light in impossible ways. Streams of data flowed constantly through her consciousness, connecting her to the vast network of knowledge that her people had built across the galaxy. She could access any piece of information in seconds, making her one of the most intelligent beings in the academy. The 3rd member of their study group approached from the shadow of a nearby tower. Nithara moved like flowing darkness, her form seeming to shift and blur at the edges. The Voidborn were creatures of space itself, born in the empty places between stars where normal matter could not exist. Her people could read thoughts as easily as others read books, and they had used this gift to build an empire based on perfect understanding of other species. Her eyes were pools of starlight that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. These 3 students represented some of the most advanced civilizations in the known galaxy. They had formed their study group not out of friendship, but out of mutual recognition of their superior status. Each came from a race that had mastered their corner of space through different means, but all had achieved greatness that lesser species could only dream of. The morning class was Interspecies Relations and Galactic History, taught by Professor Velmoth in the great lecture hall at the heart of the academy. The professor belonged to a species so ancient that most had forgotten their original name. His people had been exploring space when most current civilizations were still learning to make fire. Time had worn his features smooth, and his eyes held the weight of seeing empires rise and fall like waves on a shore. Students filed into the vast chamber, its walls covered with star maps and holographic displays showing the current state of galactic politics. Representatives from 43 different species took their seats on platforms adjusted for their various physical needs. Some required water tanks, others needed gravity fields, and a few existed only as energy patterns projected into special containers. Professor Velmoth began the lesson with his usual calm voice that somehow reached every corner of the hall despite its enormous size. Today's topic was the Restricted Species List, a collection of civilizations that the Galactic Council had declared off-limits for various reasons. Some were too primitive for contact, others too dangerous, and a few too unpredictable to risk interaction. The first few entries on the list drew little attention from the students. The molten cores of Kepler 78b were too hot for most species to approach. The gas dancers of Neptune's storm lived in conditions that would kill any solid being, The crystal singers of Arcturus had declared themselves isolationists and wanted no contact with outsiders. But when Professor Velmoth reached entry number 847 on the list, something shifted in the classroom atmosphere. The name appeared on the central display in letters that seemed to glow with warning. Species classification, human. Planet of origin, Earth. Status, complete contact prohibition. A ripple of surprise and confusion moved through the assembled students. Most had never heard of this species before, and those who had knew only vague references from ancient texts. The prohibition was marked with the highest level of restriction, reserved for the most dangerous entities in the galaxy. Zektar was the first to break the respectful silence that usually marked Professor Velmoth's lectures. His voice carried the natural arrogance of his warrior heritage as he spoke. Humans? Professor, surely there must be some mistake in the records. My people have explored that sector of space, and the species there has barely left their home planet. They use primitive, chemical rockets that can barely reach their own moon. Kulima's crystalline form shimmered as data flowed through her consciousness, accessing everything her people knew about the distant species. My databases confirm this observation. The humans have not achieved faster-than-light travel. They have no energy weapons beyond simple projectile devices. Their technology appears to be several thousand years behind even the most basic galactic standards. How could such a backward species possibly warrant a complete contact prohibition? Other students began to murmur among themselves, sharing the confusion and growing amusement of their more vocal classmates. The idea that a species so primitive could be considered dangerous enough to ban seemed ridiculous to beings who could manipulate matter at the atomic level or project their consciousness across star systems. Nithara's telepathic abilities picked up the emotional currents flowing through the classroom. Amusement, confusion, and a growing sense of superiority filled the minds around her. She spoke with the measured tone that her people used when stating obvious facts. Professor, I can sense no deception in your presentation, but surely you understand our confusion. A species that has not even achieved basic space travel could hardly pose a threat to civilizations that have mastered the fundamental forces of the universe. The laughter started small, just a few quiet chuckles from students who thought the whole situation absurd. But it quickly grew as more young beings joined in the mockery. Soon the great lecture hall echoed with the sounds of dozens of different species expressing their amusement at the idea that humans could be dangerous. Perhaps they throw their primitive rockets at enemy ships, suggested a student from the Silicon Quartz, his metallic body ringing like a bell as he laughed. Maybe they're so ugly that other species flee in terror, added a representative from the Beautiful Ones, a race that valued physical perfection above all else. I hear they're so short-lived that they die of old age before they can finish building proper spaceships, contributed a member of the Eternal Dance, beings who measured their lifespans in geological ages. Professor Velmoth tried to restore order to his classroom, but the students were caught up in their shared sense of superiority. They had spent years studying the great civilizations of the galaxy, learning about species that could reshape planets or exist as pure energy. The idea that hairless bipeds from a small blue world could be worth fearing seemed like the greatest joke they had ever heard. Zektar stood up on his platform, his forearms spread wide as he addressed his fellow students. Perhaps the humans are so primitive that the Galactic Council fears they might contaminate us with their backward thinking. We wouldn't want to catch their inability to build proper technology. This brought fresh waves of laughter from the assembled students. Even species that rarely showed emotion found themselves amused by the situation. The restriction on human contact had become the best entertainment they had experienced in months of serious academic study. But Professor Velmoth was not laughing. The ancient being watched his students with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of stars, and the endless cycle of species that thought themselves superior to all others. He had taught at the academy for longer than most civilizations had existed, and he had seen this same arrogant confidence many times before. The professor waited for the laughter to die down before speaking again. His voice carried a weight that gradually drew the attention of even the most amused students. Young ones, your confidence in your own superiority is familiar. Many species have stood where you stand now, certain that their technology and achievements made them masters of the galaxy. Most of them are now nothing but names in history books. The laughter slowly faded as students realized their professor was serious. The ancient being moved to the center of the hall, his presence somehow filling the vast space despite his small stature. The restriction on human contact was not made lightly, Professor Velmoth continued. It was agreed upon by every major civilization in the galaxy after careful study and considerable debate. Perhaps it is time you learned why beings far wiser and more experienced than yourselves chose to fear a species that has never left their home star system. The classroom fell silent as Professor Velmoth moved to the main control panel. His fingers danced across interfaces older than most of the students' homeworlds, accessing files that carried the highest security classifications in galactic records. "What you are about to see," the professor said softly, "is the reason why directive." The great hall darkened as Professor Velmoth activated the ancient holographic systems built into the Academy's core. Three-dimensional images began to form in the air above the students, so real they seemed solid enough to touch. The first image showed the vast emptiness of space near a small blue planet that orbited a yellow star in one of the galaxy's outer arms. This footage comes from the archives of the Zephyrian Exploration Fleet, Professor Velmoth announced as the images sharpened into focus. The date stamp indicates it was recorded 2,147 standard years ago, during humanity's early space age. What you are about to witness was classified at the highest levels by the Galactic Council and has never been shown to students before today. The scene showed a sleek, silver ship drifting without power near Earth's pale moon. The vessel's elegant curves and energy signatures marked it clearly as Zephyrian technology, far advanced beyond anything the primitive humans of that era could have built. Damage to the ship's hull suggested some kind of accident had left the crew stranded in the cold vacuum of space. Zektar leaned forward on his platform, his amber eyes studying the display with professional interest. His warrior training had taught him to recognize disabled vessels and assess tactical situations quickly. "Standard exploration ship configuration," he muttered to his companions. "Looks like they suffered a power core failure. Nothing their own rescue ships couldn't handle." But Kulima's crystalline form flickered with confusion as data streams flowed through her consciousness. "Professor, my records show no Zephyrian rescue operations in that sector during this time period. The nearest Zephyrian base was 17 light-years away. How did they escape from such a remote location?" Professor Velmoth smiled slightly, the expression carrying hints of the wisdom that came from living through countless galactic ages. "Patience, young scholar. The answer to your question is the reason we are all here today." The holographic display shifted to show a much smaller craft approaching the stranded alien vessel. The new ship was crude by galactic standards, little more than metal cylinders held together with primitive chemical rockets. Its design showed all the hallmarks of early human engineering: functional but inelegant, powerful but inefficient, built with determination rather than advanced technology. "The human vessel Endeavor," Professor Velmoth announced. "Crew of 6 on what their species calls a deep space exploration mission. Captain Jake Morrison commanding. They were investigating what their primitive sensors had detected as an unusual object near their moon." The students watched with growing curiosity as the human ship maneuvered closer to the alien vessel. Radio communications crackled through. The hall's audio systems translated from the ancient human language into galactic standard. The voices carried tones of excitement and wonder as the humans realized they were looking at technology beyond their understanding. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain Morrison of the Earthship Endeavor," came the translated voice through the speakers. "We're detecting hull breaches and no power signatures from your ship. Do you require assistance?" A ripple of surprise moved through the assembled students. Nithara's telepathic senses picked up the genuine concern in the human captain's voice, the immediate offer of help to complete strangers from another world. Her people had studied thousands of first contact scenarios, and this reaction was unlike anything in their databases. The Zephyrian response came weak and broken through damaged communication systems. "Human vessel. Yes, we require assistance. Our power core has failed, and life support is failing. We have injured crew members who need immediate medical attention." What happened next brought complete silence to the lecture hall. Instead of demanding information about alien technology or requesting proof of peaceful intentions, Captain Morrison immediately began coordinating rescue operations. The humans worked with desperate efficiency to modify their own life support systems, sharing their limited oxygen supplies with beings they had never seen before. They rigged emergency medical equipment to work with alien physiology they didn't understand, using nothing but quick thinking and human determination. "This is impossible," whispered a student from the Logical Supremacy, a species that prided itself on rational decision-making. "They're risking their own survival for complete strangers. There's no logical benefit to such actions." The footage showed human crew members working in the vacuum of space, their primitive suits offering minimal protection as they manually transferred power cells from their own ship to keep the alien vessel's life support running. Dr. Amy Taylor, the mission's medical officer, had converted the Endeavor's sick bay into an emergency treatment center for injured Zephyrians, despite having no knowledge of alien biology beyond basic scans. Engineer Rob Phillips had torn apart half of his own ship's systems to jury-rig repairs for technology centuries ahead of human understanding. His hands worked with steady precision even as his own air supply ran dangerously low, refusing to stop until the alien ship's main systems came back online. "Look at their faces," Nithara said softly, her telepathic abilities reading the emotions displayed in the holographic humans. "There's no calculation here, no thought of reward or recognition. They're simply doing what they believe is right." Communications specialist Linda Brooks had spent hours learning enough of the Zephyrian language to coordinate rescue efforts, her quick mind adapting to alien concepts and sounds with remarkable speed. Navigator Carl Stone had plotted courses to carry the damaged alien ship to safety, using mathematical techniques that pushed human knowledge to its absolute limits. The most shocking moment came when the alien ship's power core began to destabilize, threatening both vessels with destruction. Captain Morrison didn't hesitate to order his crew to remain with the aliens, choosing certain death rather than abandoning people who needed help. "We're not leaving anyone behind," Morrison's voice came clearly through the audio systems. "That's not who we are." Fortunately, Engineer Phillips managed to stabilize the alien power core just minutes before catastrophic failure. But the students watching the footage understood that Captain Morrison had been prepared to die rather than abandon his moral principles. The rescue took 18 hours of continuous work, during which the humans shared everything they had with their unexpected guests. Food, water, air, medical supplies, and even personal items were freely given to make the aliens comfortable. Dr. Taylor had worked herself to exhaustion treating Zephyrian injuries with improvised techniques that should have been impossible. When Zephyrian rescue ships finally arrived, they found their people alive and recovering, cared for by a species that had every reason to fear them but chose compassion instead. The human crew asked for nothing in return except the knowledge that they had helped someone in need. The Zephyrian captain's official report is preserved in our archives, Professor Velmoth announced as the footage faded. I will read you his concluding statement. In 30 years of exploration, I have encountered 47 different species across the galaxy. Never before have I witnessed such immediate and selfless action from complete strangers. These humans risked everything to save people they had never seen before, asking nothing in return but the opportunity to help. They possess something that our advanced civilization seems to have lost somewhere among the stars. The lecture hall remained absolutely silent as students processed what they had witnessed. The casual mockery from earlier seemed like a distant memory, replaced by confusion and growing unease. Quilima's crystalline form flickered rapidly as she processed the implications of what she had seen. Professor, this behavior pattern doesn't match any known survival strategies. Sacrificing resources for unknown entities provides no evolutionary advantage. How did such a species survive long enough to develop space travel? Zektar's 4 arms were crossed tightly across his chest, his warrior's mind struggling to understand tactics that made no sense from a military perspective. They weakened their own position to help potential enemies. Any rational species would have studied the alien technology first, gathered intelligence, and then decided whether assistance was worthwhile. But it was Nithara who voiced the question that was forming in every student's mind. Her telepathic abilities had picked up something in the human emotions that disturbed her deeply. Professor, when I read their thoughts during the rescue, I found something unexpected. They weren't acting out of duty or obligation. They weren't following orders or cultural programming. They simply wanted to help. The concept of abandoning people in need never even occurred to them. Professor Velmoth nodded slowly, his ancient eyes holding depths of knowledge that most beings could never comprehend. You begin to understand the nature of the problem, young ones. This was not an isolated incident. This is who humans are. This is what they do, and this is why the Galactic Council decided they were too dangerous for contact. The students exchanged glances across the vast hall, their earlier confidence shaken by what they had witnessed. The idea that primitives could be dangerous was no longer seemed quite so amusing. But Professor, called out a student from the merchant guilds, surely one act of irrational kindness doesn't justify a galaxy-wide prohibition. Many species have shown compassion to strangers. The holographic display shifted to show a fleet of massive warships hanging in space like dark thunderclouds. Their hulls were scarred from countless battles, and weapon ports bristled along their sides like the teeth of some great predator. The ships bore the crimson markings of the Corventi Empire, a civilization that had built its power through conquest and the absolute belief that might made right. The Corventi First Battle Fleet, Professor Velmoth announced as the images stabilized. Led by War Commander Grixnall, one of the most feared military leaders in galactic history, this footage was recorded 2,156 standard years ago when the Corventi discovered the human homeworld during their expansion into what they considered unclaimed territory. Zektar straightened on his platform, his warrior instincts responding to the sight of ships built for war. His own people respected the Corventi as fellow warriors, though they found their methods crude and their honor questionable. "The Corventi don't negotiate," he said quietly. "They appear, they demand submission, and they destroy anyone who refuses. It's an effective strategy against most species." The scene shifted to show the bridge of the Corventi flagship, where War Commander Grixnall stood like a living mountain of muscle and bone. His species had evolved from apex predators, and everything about their physiology spoke of violence and dominance. Thick armor plating covered his body naturally, and his four-clawed hands could crush steel without effort. When Corventi spoke, other species listened or died. Primitive world designation: Terra 3. Grixnall's voice rumbled through the translation. Systems like distant thunder. Population scan shows approximately 8 billion bipedal life forms. Technology assessment: chemical rockets, primitive nuclear weapons, basic electronics. Threat level: negligible. Resistance probability: 0. The holographic display showed the moment when human detection systems first noticed the alien fleet. Radio communications erupted across Earth's networks as governments and military leaders tried to comprehend what they were seeing. The primitive radar and telescope systems of that era could barely track the massive alien vessels, but what they saw was enough to cause panic on a global scale. But instead of the expected chaos and surrender, something unexpected happened. A single human vessel rose from Earth's surface to meet the alien fleet. It was a small military shuttle, armed with nothing more than conventional missiles that would bounce harmlessly off Corventi shields. Yet it approached the massive warships without hesitation. "Human vessel, this is War Commander Grixnall of the Corventi Empire." The translation systems carried the alien leader's words. "You will prepare for immediate occupation of your world. Resistance is futile and will result in the destruction of your entire species." The human response came clear and steady through the communication channels. "War Commander, this is Colonel Lisa Wang of the Earth Defense Force. I'm authorized to speak for my planet in this matter." Quilima's crystalline form flickered with rapid data processing as she analyzed the tactical situation. "Professor, the power differential here is absurd. That human ship couldn't damage a Corventi vessel if they used their entire nuclear arsenal. What could they possibly hope to accomplish?" The answer came as Colonel Wang's voice continued over the communication systems. "War Commander, I understand that your people are warriors who value strength and honor in battle. I propose single combat between champions to settle this matter. If your champion wins, Earth will submit to Corventi rule. If our champion wins, your fleet withdraws and leaves our world in peace." The lecture hall fell silent as students processed what they had just heard. A representative of a primitive species was challenging the most feared warriors in the galaxy to personal combat, using only her own strength against beings who could tear apart armored vehicles with their bare hands. War Commander Grixnall's laughter boomed through the bridge of his flagship, a sound like boulders falling down a mountain. "Little human, do you comprehend what you suggest?" Corventhi warriors have conquered 43 worlds through personal combat. Our smallest child could tear you apart without effort. I understand the risk, Colonel Wang replied calmly. But I also understand honor. Will you accept the challenge, or does the mighty Corventhi Empire fear a single human warrior? The insult struck home exactly as Wang had intended. Corventhi culture placed honor above all other values, and no war commander could refuse a direct challenge without losing face before his entire fleet. Grixnall had no choice but to accept, though he considered the outcome a foregone conclusion. The combat was arranged in the cargo bay of the Corventhi flagship, with representatives from both species present as witnesses. Colonel Wang stood barely, 5.5 feet tall, her human frame looking impossibly fragile next to Grixnall's 8-foot bulk. She carried no weapons beyond a simple combat knife, while the Corventhi warrior relied on his natural claws and armor plating. "This is not combat," muttered a student from the Silicon Courts. "This is execution. That human has no chance of survival against a Corventhi warrior." But the students watching the ancient footage were about to learn something about humans that would shake their understanding of warfare itself. The fight began with Grixnall's confident charge, his massive form moving with surprising speed as he sought to end the combat quickly. Colonel Wang didn't try to match his strength or stand against his assault. Instead, she moved like water around stone, using the Corventhi's own momentum against him. Where Grixnall expected to find resistance, he found emptiness. Where he anticipated crushing his opponent, he found only air. Colonel Wang fought with a style that transformed the cargo bay into a three-dimensional battlefield, using every surface and obstacle to her advantage. But what shocked the Corventhi witnesses was not just Wang's skill, but her attitude during the combat. She showed no fear, no anger, no hatred for her opponent. She fought with the calm focus of someone doing a necessary job, treating the massive alien warrior with the same respect she would show any worthy opponent. "Impossible," Nithara whispered, her telepathic abilities reading the emotions from the ancient recording. "She's not fighting for survival or glory. She's fighting for duty." She accepted this challenge knowing she would probably die, but believing her sacrifice might save her world. The combat continued for nearly an hour, far longer than anyone had expected. Colonel Wang used every trick of human martial arts, every lesson learned from centuries of warfare and conflict. She turned the Corventhi's strength against him, used his size as a disadvantage, and exploited every opening his confidence created. But human physiology had limits that no amount of skill could overcome. Gradually, the repeated impacts began to take their toll. Wang's movements slowed, her breathing became labored, and blood from dozens of small wounds began to affect her coordination. The end came when Grixnall finally managed to corner her against a bulkhead, his massive claws closing around her throat. Colonel Wang had fought brilliantly, but biology and physics could not be denied. The Corventhi warrior had won. But what happened in the final moments of the combat would be remembered in Corventhi military academies for generations to come as Wang's consciousness began to fade. Her ship's sensors detected something the Corventhi fleet had missed. A massive solar flare was building in the local star, one that would release enough radiation to destroy any ships caught in its path. The Corventhi vessels, positioned between the star and the planet, would be directly in the line of destruction. With Her last moments of consciousness, Colonel Wang used her remaining breath not to curse her opponent or beg for mercy, but to warn the alien fleet about the approaching danger. "Solar flare," she gasped through her damaged throat. "Massive coronal discharge in approximately 12 minutes. Your fleet needs to move to the shadow of the planet, or the radiation will destroy your ships." Grixenol released his grip, staring down at the dying human with confusion that quickly turned to shock. His ship's sensors confirmed Wang's warning just minutes later. The approaching solar flare was indeed massive enough to destroy the entire Corventhi fleet if they remained in their current position. The war commander faced an impossible choice. According to Corventhi tradition, Wang's defeat meant Earth belonged to his empire. But the human warrior had just saved his entire fleet from destruction, showing mercy to enemies who had come to conquer her world. "Medical assistance to the cargo bay immediately," Grixenol commanded his crew, his voice carrying tones that his subordinates had never heard before. "The human champion requires healing." As Corventhi medics worked to save Colonel Wang's life, the alien fleet moved to safety behind Earth's bulk. The solar flare struck exactly as she had predicted, its radiation powerful enough to sterilize any ship caught in its path. War Commander Grixenol's personal log, recorded immediately after the incident, was played for the stunned students in the lecture hall. His voice carried a quality that Corventhi had rarely expressed in their long history of conquest. "Today I have witnessed something that challenges everything I believed about warfare and honor," the recording began. "The human champion fought with skill that rivaled our greatest warriors, despite physical limitations that should have made victory impossible. The holographic display darkened until only shadows remained, then slowly revealed a facility that seemed to exist in a realm of perpetual twilight. The walls were smooth black surfaces that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, and strange. Geometric patterns seemed to shift and move when viewed directly. This was not a place built for physical comfort, but for the systematic destruction of minds and spirits. "The Hegemony Research Station Omega-7, Professor Velmoth announced, his ancient voice carrying undertones of disgust that surprised his students. "What you are about to witness represents the darkest chapter in our galactic archives. The Hegemony built their empire not through military conquest or technological superiority, but through the complete psychological domination of other species. Nithara's telepathic senses recoiled from the images before them. Even through the holographic recording, she could feel the residual psychic energy that clung to the facility like a poison. "Professor, the mental resonance from this place is overwhelming. What kind of experiments were conducted here?" "The Hegemony had perfected techniques for breaking the will of any sentient being," the professor replied grimly. "They could reduce the proudest warrior to a whimpering shell, turn the most devoted parent against their own children, and make entire populations beg for slavery rather than face another day of psychological torture. 47 civilizations surrendered to them, without firing a single shot, preferring conquest to the alternative. The scene shifted to show the interior of a sterile white chamber where a single figure sat strapped to a chair surrounded by complex machinery. Dr. Patricia Chen appeared to be in her early 40s, with graying hair and the calm demeanor of someone accustomed to facing difficult challenges. She wore the simple blue uniform of Earth's scientific corps, though it was now torn and stained from weeks of captivity. Dr. Chen was captured during humanity's third deep space exploration mission, Professor Velmoth explained. She was a xenopsychologist, one of the few humans qualified to study alien mental processes. The hegemony considered her capture a perfect opportunity to test their techniques on a representative of this mysterious banned species. The students watched. As alien figures moved around Dr. Chen's chair, their forms seeming to shift and blur at the edges. The hegemony had evolved beyond fixed physical shapes, existing as manifestations of pure psychological pressure. They could become whatever form would create the most fear and despair in their victims. Initiate Phase 1, Psychological Conditioning, commanded the lead hegemony operative, its voice carrying harmonics designed to trigger primal terror in most species. Standard fear escalation protocols. Break down resistance barriers and establish dominance hierarchy. What followed was a systematic assault on Dr. Chen's mind that would have shattered most beings within minutes. The hegemony projectors filled the chamber with images of Earth being destroyed, of her family and friends suffering horrible deaths, of humanity being wiped from existence while she watched helplessly. They amplified every fear, every doubt, every moment of weakness from her past, and turned them into weapons against her consciousness. But Dr. Chen's response was unlike anything the hegemony had encountered in centuries of conquest. "Interesting methodology," she said calmly, her voice steady despite the psychological torture surrounding her. "You're using a combination of sensory manipulation and emotional amplification to override rational thought processes. The fear response triggers are quite sophisticated, though I notice you're having difficulty calibrating them for human neurochemistry." The hegemony operatives paused their assault, confused by their victim's analytical response. Most beings were screaming in terror by this point, begging for mercy or promising anything to make the torture stop. Dr. Chen was treating their most advanced psychological warfare techniques like a fascinating research project. "Perhaps we should increase the intensity," suggested one of the operatives. "Some species require stronger initial conditioning." "Phase 2 initiation," the lead operative commanded. "Deploy existential dread protocols and hope destruction sequences." The chamber filled with new horrors as the hegemony activated their most powerful weapons. They showed Dr. Chen visions of meaninglessness, of a universe where nothing mattered and all effort was futile. They projected scenarios where humanity's greatest achievements were forgotten, where Earth itself was nothing but a speck of dust. In an uncaring cosmos, where every act of love and sacrifice was ultimately pointless. Kalima's crystalline form flickered rapidly as she processed what she was witnessing. "Professor, these techniques have broken the most mentally resilient species in the galaxy. How is this human maintaining her sanity?" Dr. Chen's response answered that question in a way that shook every student in the lecture hall. "You know, this is actually quite helpful for my research," she said, leaning forward in her restraints with genuine interest. "I've been studying how different species process existential concepts, and your approach reveals fascinating insights into your own psychological development. You seem to believe that showing me the vastness of the universe will make me feel insignificant, but that's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of human psychology." The hegemony operatives exchanged confused signals, their perfect confidence beginning to crack for the first time in their collective memory. "You see," Dr. Chen continued, speaking as if she were delivering a lecture rather than being tortured, "humans don't derive meaning from being important in cosmic terms. We create meaning through our connections with each other and our commitment to values we choose to uphold. The size of the universe doesn't diminish the love I feel for my daughter or the satisfaction I get from advancing scientific knowledge. Impossible, hissed the lead operative. All sentient beings require external validation of their significance. Without cosmic importance, consciousness becomes meaningless. Dr. Chen actually smiled, an expression that sent waves of confusion through the hegemony's collective consciousness. That's where you're wrong. Humans learned long ago that we have to create our own meaning. We've been dealing with existential questions since we first looked up at the stars and realized how small we were. The fact that the universe doesn't care about us doesn't make us matter less to each other. The torture continued for days, with the hegemony deploying increasingly desperate psychological techniques. They showed her scenarios where her research was proven wrong, where her life's work was meaningless, where she had failed everyone who ever trusted her. They amplified her personal guilt about being captured, suggested that her presence here would lead to Earth's destruction, and tried to convince her that her resistance was causing unnecessary suffering. But with each assault, Dr. Chen became more analytical rather than more broken. She began to understand the psychological framework that the hegemony used to maintain their own sanity, recognizing the deep trauma and fear that drove their need to dominate others. "You're all terrified," she said, during one particularly intense session. "That's what drives this whole system. You break others because you're afraid of being broken yourselves. You need to believe that consciousness is weak and meaningless, because the alternative would force you to confront your own choices. We are the masters of psychological warfare," the lead operative declared, though its voice carried less certainty than before. "We have conquered dozens of species through the power of pure mental domination, and in doing so, you've trapped yourselves in a prison of your own making," Dr. Chen replied gently. "You've become so focused on proving that hope and meaning are illusions that you've forgotten how to experience them yourselves. When was the last time any of you felt genuine joy or satisfaction? When did you last create something beautiful, just because it brought you happiness?" The question struck at the heart of the hegemony's psychological structure. They had spent so many centuries destroying hope in others that they had forgotten what it felt like to hope for anything themselves. Their entire civilization had become a machine for creating misery, sustained only by the belief that misery was the natural state of all consciousness. "You're suffering," Dr. Chen said softly, her voice carrying the kind of compassion that the hegemony had spent millennia trying to eradicate from the galaxy. "All of you. You've built a society based on the principle that suffering is inevitable, and now you can't imagine any other way to exist. But it doesn't have to be this way." The lead operative's form began to fluctuate wildly as it struggled to process concepts that contradicted everything the hegemony had believed for thousands of years. "You seek to manipulate us with false hope. This is merely another form of psychological warfare." "No," Dr. Chen replied, her restraints unable to hide the genuine concern in her posture. "This is me offering to help you heal. Your species has been traumatized by something, probably so long ago that you've forgotten what it was. You've spent generations convincing yourselves that trauma is strength, that the ability to inflict suffering is the highest achievement of consciousness. But I can see the pain you carry. I can hear it in your voices and see it in how you move. You're not evil beings who chose to become monsters. You're hurt beings who learned to hurt others because you didn't know any other way to survive." The holographic display shifted one final time, revealing the most sacred chamber in the known galaxy. The council hall of the Galactic Federation stretched beyond the limits of normal architecture, its crystalline walls reaching toward infinity. while somehow containing the vast space within manageable dimensions. Representatives from every major civilization sat in perfectly arranged circles, their forms creating a living mandala of galactic diversity. The emergency session of 2047 standard years ago, Professor Velmoth announced, his voice carrying the weight of history. For the first time in over 10,000 years, every major civilization agreed to attend a single gathering. The topic under discussion was simple: what to do about the humans of Earth. The students watched in awed silence as the greatest minds in galactic history filled the ancient chamber. Here sat the eternal philosophers, beings who had pondered the nature of existence since the first stars formed. There were the archive keepers, who had cataloged the rise and fall of countless civilizations, the crystal singers, the void walkers, the matter shapers, and dozens of other species that had achieved heights of development most beings could barely imagine. At the center of the gathering, a figure of impossible age and authority called the session to order. Elder Zixathera of the Watchers was old when the galaxy was young, her species having achieved transcendence so long ago that most had forgotten they had ever been physical beings. When she spoke, reality itself seemed to pause and listen. "We gather today to address a threat unlike any our galaxy has faced," Elder Zixathera began, her voice resonating through dimensions beyond normal space. "A species that has never left their home system, yet whose very existence challenges the foundation of our cosmic order." Ambassador Kethvar of the Altarians was the first to present evidence to the assembly. His 4 arms gestured with military precision as he addressed the gathering of galactic powers. "Honored representatives, my people have observed these humans in combat situations. What we have witnessed defies every principle of logical warfare. They show honor to enemies who seek their destruction. They sacrifice strategic advantages to preserve the lives of those who would conquer them." The ambassador paused, his warriors, training struggling with concepts that his culture had no framework to understand. "In our encounter with their champion, we learned that humans will choose certain death rather than abandon their principles. They cannot be conquered through traditional military means because they refuse to surrender their values even when facing annihilation." The Cerebral Collective's representative spoke next, its crystalline form flickering with the light of 1,000,000 calculations. "Our analysis confirms Ambassador Kethvar's observations. Human learning capacity exceeds our computational models by factors we previously considered impossible. They reverse engineer technology that should be beyond their understanding and improve upon designs that took us centuries to perfect." Data streams flowed through the chamber as the collective shared their findings with the assembled delegates. More concerning is their adaptive social structure. They create cooperative networks without centralized control systems. They generate innovation through diversity rather than optimization. Their entire species operates according to principles that our models predict should lead to immediate collapse, yet they continue to thrive and develop. But it was the testimony of the hegemony's supreme mind Orthogal that brought true silence to the Great Chamber. The entity that had broken the will of 47 civilizations spoke with something approaching fear in its multidimensional voice. "Honored Assembly, the hegemony has perfected psychological warfare to a degree that allows us to conquer entire species without firing a single weapon. Our techniques can reduce the proudest beings to broken shells, can turn hope into despair, can make entire populations beg for the mercy of slavery." The Supreme Mind's form shifted through impossible geometries as it struggled to convey concepts that threatened its very nature. We deployed our most advanced protocols against a single human scientist. Not only did our techniques fail completely, but the subject began to analyze and understand our methods with disturbing accuracy. Worse, she expressed genuine concern for our psychological well-being and offered to help us develop healthier mental frameworks. Whispers of shock and disbelief rippled through the assembly. The hegemony's psychological dominance had been absolute for millennia. The idea that any being could not only resist their techniques, but turn them into opportunities for healing, was beyond the comprehension of most species present. The human did not defeat our operatives through superior mental defenses or advanced psychological training. Supreme Mind Orthogal continued. She simply remained compassionate in the face of designed cruelty, maintained hope despite systematic despair, and offered healing to those who sought to break her. Our operatives fled not because they were overpowered, but because they could no longer justify their actions when confronted with such unwavering kindness. Elder Zixathera called for order as the chamber erupted in concerned discussion. Representatives, who had maintained diplomatic composure for thousands of years, found themselves openly debating the implications of what they had heard. "The pattern is clear," announced the archive keeper of the historical collective, her voice carrying the authority of one who had recorded the fate of every known civilization. "Humans do not conquer through military might, technological superiority, or psychological manipulation. They inspire change through the simple act of remaining true to principles that most species have abandoned in their pursuit of power." The ancient scholar of the Philosophical Union rose to address the assembly, his form seeming to exist partially outside normal space-time. "We have observed 43 separate interactions between humans and various galactic civilizations. In every case, the humans have acted with consistent moral principles despite facing certain death or worse. They show mercy to enemies, sacrifice for strangers, and maintain hope in hopeless situations. But the most disturbing aspect of these interactions is not what the humans do, but what happens to those who encounter them. Every species that has made contact with humans has begun to question their own values, their own choices, their own path. The Zephyrians have reformed their exploration protocols to prioritize rescue operations. The Corventhi have begun questioning the morality of conquest. The hegemony's operatives are showing signs of psychological healing for the first time in millennia. A representative from the merchant guilds raised a concern that many delegates were thinking but few dared voice. "Honored scholars, are we suggesting that we should fear a species because they inspire others to become better? Should moral improvement be considered a threat to galactic stability?" The answer came from an unexpected source. The Void Dancers, a species that existed primarily in the empty spaces between stars, rarely participated in galactic politics, but their representative chose this moment to break their usual silence. "You misunderstand the nature of the threat," the Void Dancer said, its form barely visible even to enhanced sensors. "Humans do not threaten individual species or civilizations. They threaten the current order of the galaxy itself. Every major power has built their dominance on the assumption that consciousness naturally tends toward selfishness, competition, and the pursuit of individual gain." The Void Dancer's presence seemed to fill the chamber despite its nearly invisible form. Humans prove that assumption false. They demonstrate that consciousness can choose cooperation over competition, sacrifice over selfishness, hope over despair. If this knowledge spreads, if other species begin to adopt human principles, the entire structure of galactic civilization will transform beyond recognition. Elder Zixathera nodded slowly, her ancient wisdom recognizing the truth in the void. Dancer's words. The young merchant asks whether moral improvement should be feared. The answer is complex. Change, even positive change, brings uncertainty. A galaxy full of species operating on human principles would be radically different from the one we know. Consider the implications, the elder continued. If all species adopted human values, there would be no more conquest, no more exploitation, no more psychological warfare. Resources would be shared rather than hoarded. Knowledge would be freely exchanged rather than jealously guarded. Conflicts would be resolved through cooperation rather than force. A representative from the technological supremacy spoke with barely concealed panic. Such changes would destabilize every existing power structure in the galaxy. Civilizations that have spent millennia developing military and economic advantages would find those advantages meaningless in a galaxy governed by human principles. Precisely, Elder Zixthera confirmed. Humanity represents an existential threat not to individual beings or species, but to the fundamental assumptions upon which our current galactic order is built. They are dangerous not because they would destroy us, but because they would transform us. The debate continued for days as representatives struggled with concepts that challenged everything they believed about consciousness, civilization, and the nature of intelligent life. Some argued for immediate contact, believing that human influence could guide the galaxy toward a better future.